Welcome back to the podcast, everyone. We are very excited today. Our special guest today is Tamara. And Tamara, we actually met on TikTok, of all places. You are known as Jezebel on your social media. And I love that because there were times in my upbringing that I was referred to as a Jezebel. So I feel like we have a little bit of a connection there just on based on that. But anyway, Susie and I are so happy to have you here. So without further ado, welcome.
Thank you so much. And exactly the reasons you were called Jezebel growing up are exactly the reasons that I took back my power and took that name and took the power away from those who called me Jezebel and just became the proud queen who defended her country.
Yeah. I love that.
I
I
mean,
love
that's
it.
actually what she did. If you go back to the Bible scriptures, she was the queen of Baal. She had a weaker husband, and she protected her military from being killed and being taken away. So if you want to scorn me for being Jezebel, just remember there's another side to Jezebel, and she was a very powerful queen.
Oh my gosh, I
Yes.
love that so much. I did not know that. I think I'm excited to hear your story because I feel like there, and the part of the reason we do this podcast is there are just so many gaps in our education with regards to the important ideas and people we should know about, but it's been sort of twisted. Even the ones in the Bible, it's just twisted a little bit to make it be about whatever the pastor wanted to say or, the person in charge. And so I love hearing all these perspectives of things. So this is so exciting.
I think so too. And when I realized, like about 5 years ago, maybe longer than that, my brother started reaching out to my children. And when I realized that my story was still being told after 25 years, as a point of fearing and putting fear in the young girls of the church that I escaped from, I refer to it as a cult, that I
Mhm.
said, I will no longer be shamed by that word, Jezebel. And I went and read about her. And I'm like, exactly when you're reading her in a secular type of story,
Mhm.
what was wrong with her?
Yeah, that's a
She was a
really good
queen of
point.
her country fighting back against the Israelites. However, growing up, I was taught that the Israel and were God's chosen, so they could go into any country, take over, take their women, children, kill the queens and kings, and that was all allowed under the biblical laws of the land at the time. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, you call me a Jezebel, you scorn me, you shame me, you shun me, and then you make sure I wear a title of shame,
Wow.
especially if you're a Christian raised female, a Proverbs 32 woman, you definitely don't want to be referred to as a Jezebel. And I'm
Mhm.
like, no, you no longer have that power. I
Yeah.
thus am Jezebel.
Oh, it's so
And you
full
know
of
what?
feels. I love it.
I know, right? And you know what? It's funny because you mentioned the Proverbs 31 woman, and it's like she was an entrepreneur. She was a
Mhm.
very independent person.
Mhm.
She brought in the dough. And if
She made all the
you,
clothes. She did
Yeah.
all the cooking.
yeah,
Yeah.
she had real estate. She was like amazing, right? She
And
was a boss lady. So it's
her
like, wait a
husband
minute.
sat at the gates and talked highly of her all day.
And you know what's funny is the way that we were raised, we were taught that like women are supposed to be subservient. We are have the women in the churches that like we were raised aren't even allowed to work outside the home. It's like, well, how is that biblical? But they want to take that Proverbs 31 woman and just say, oh, her husband trusts in her, her price is far above ruby. They want to make it about what she is to the husband. In
Mhm.
their mind, it's more of a she's a servant to her husband. She's being, not defrauding her husband of sexuality or whatever. And it's like, no, that's only a little teeny part of it. It's the bigger picture is she was a boss lady. She was
Yes.
an amazing independent woman, and they want to skip all that because they don't want the women in the churches to be like that.
No, they
Truthfully.
definitely put their, and I say this, every church has their own spin on the different way they portray the Bible to their congregation. They
True.
all have their own little mantra or their own little scripture that is like their organizational statement.
Right. Right. So I love that we're getting into this like so quickly and talking about women empowerment essentially, which I love. I'm all about it. And but just so we can kind of like go back a little bit, and why don't you take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us kind of how you got into this cult and maybe what religion it was.
So, my name is Tamara Buchanan. I was raised Apostolic Pentecostal. There was a charismatic minister that was in Michigan at the time in Lapeer that came by to do a revival. And he was moving to South Florida, and he came up to my parents after the service that he preached. He was extremely fanatical, extremely right wing. And asked my dad if he would follow him to Florida. My dad
Wow.
was an electrical engineer in Michigan. He worked at Victor's at the time. So I came from a definitely middle class family that went to church. Apostolic Pentecostals believe in the oneness of the Godhead, the evidence of speaking in tongue, and being baptized in Jesus' name. So there are very core beliefs outside of the godliness and holiness that must be rigidly followed in order for you to be part of the chosen ones. My parents packed up our home, sold everything, moved and followed him around Florida, and then settled in West Palm Beach, where he started a church there at the time. So
Oh my
that's how I originally became a part of. I was a very young girl. Gosh, I was maybe 4 when my parents started their process of changing from being Southern Baptist to United Pentecostal, and then ultimately to this ultra independent Apostolic Pentecostal organization.
yeah. Wow. I started to think it's so interesting to me when people like uproot everything to follow a person around. Jenny and I talk sometimes about the red flags of what a cult is. And right there, unless you are following, you are a roadie and following a band. I don't believe that you should uproot everything to follow a minister around, you
Right,
know.
exactly.
And this was a funny thing. When we moved, we had 5 acres of land in Lapeer. We had a small farm, a beautiful home, 4 bedrooms, 2 baths as a young girl. And my parents sold everything. And we lived in a 9 by 20 box trailer. And my parents converted it when we went to South Florida to like having bunk beds stacked in the back for all the kids. And we slept at campgrounds for like a year and a half. I mean, my parents went from wealth for us to be with like nothing. Then I was down here and I was being bused to schools in West Palm Beach. I didn't know anybody. I would wet my pants every day because I was so
Aw.
afraid and scared. So it was a huge, drastic change for me. But with places that I consider high controlled religions or cults, they filled my parents' needs for everything. Like instantly, my family became one of the founders of the church. Instantly, my family, had everything that they missed
Yeah.
fulfilled. So whenever people are saying, well, how are they able to do this? Well, they not only usually promote God, but they also promote all those other areas in your life that you're lacking. Family, friends, companionship, jobs, homes, you name it, it is instantly filled. Food, the women of the church do all the cooking. If you're in need of anything, all you have to do is call sister so and so because she has it available. Or if you need a job, you call brother so and so. So there's like this hierarchy in
Oh yeah.
most churches that the ones who take care of all the jobs and will get the ones who are coming in a job to help them out. The ones that are in real estate, they'll get you a house to rent because they own the homes. So it just very much becomes a way of life instead of just a church you attend once a week.
Correct. And then that way they're able to really isolate you into this bubble. And so then you really don't need or have the ability to have that contact with the outside world, the relationships outside of the church. And I think that's really when they can start to control and become more like a cult.
And the book of Luke says, if you forsake your mother, father, brother, sister, pick up your cross and follow me. And that is exactly the scripture that was taught to me as a child every day of my life, that we gave it all up, but we're following.
But it wasn't to follow Jesus. It was to follow this
Right.
incredible. Oh my gosh.
In terms, if you think of it, we also were taught that God speaks to the minister or the bishop of the church. The bishops speak to the men of the church. The men of the church speak to their wives or their daughters. And if there's not a father, then your brothers take over. If there's not a brother, then his family takes over. So it's always the male of the family that become the person who puts into place the teachings of what that pastor said. So there's definitely like a certain way that it's done. Yes. So I'm gonna, if you don't mind, I'm gonna read what I wrote about it, and it will give you an idea of exactly how it was. It says, unseen, unheard, but still here. I was born into silence, a whisper, a ghost, a shadow that bent where men mattered most. Eyes to the floor, voice swallowed whole, a life built in silence, a story untold. Shame was a scripture written in stone, a lesson repeated. You walk this alone. To speak was rebellion, to question was sin. So I locked all my dreams in a cage of my skin.
Wow.
But even in darkness, a flicker remained, a fire too quiet, yet never quite tamed. I traced it through sorrow, through exile, through pain, through nights where the echoes still called me by name. I stumbled, I shattered, I bled just to learn. That freedom is something you fight for, not earned. The past does not own me. It whispers but fades. I rise from the ashes, unburdened, unchained. So here is my voice, no longer afraid, no longer a ghost in the silence they made. I stand in the sunlight, I meet the world's gaze, unseen once before, but now I am raised.
Oh,
You're so
that is absolutely beautiful.
My goodness, have you ever published your
I am working on it. I have a series that I'm working on and this year actually. So I'm hoping to learn how to put all my words into a short book. You know, like I'm going to, like each poem is like a different part of my life. And then I want to write like a short 2 or 3 page of what that represented to me, and then do another intro, and then write what happened to me during that time period of my life. So not like exact autobiography, but a glimpse of the times in history or the times in my past that resonate with me and actually put me in a place to change and be who I am today.
Wow. That's awesome. I love it.
Thank you. I often say, and you'll often hear me say, that trauma did make me who I am today, but trauma does not define who I am today.
Oh,
So we're a lot of times that a lot of us, and I always say, I learned how to survive because that was the only thing that pushed me forward. I had to do this, but it's not who I am. It is a chapter of my story. Learning how to live and not survive is a bigger part of my life than escaping the cult that I was raised in. Because the indoctrinations still are implanted in the very deepest part of my brain to this day.
yeah, it's very hard. It's hard to overcome that, like weeds in a garden, and they just keep popping up every once in a while.
Yes.
Yeah. So When you were back at that church in Florida, what, tell us if there's anything that we should know about what happened at that church while you were at that church, what that did to your family. You talked about living in that cramped trailer in a campground. Like, that's crazy, right? You had a nice, comfortable lifestyle living in Michigan. Your dad had a job working as an electrical engineer, making decent money. And then all the sudden, everything is changed. And walk us through that experience when you were a kid at that point. You were what, 4 or 5 years old when that happened?
I was 4 when it began. I think I was around 5 or 6, maybe 7, when we actually finally settled down in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Okay.
We were so indoctrinated and so taught that this was God's will, that as a child, I did not question God's will. We were taught not to question God and God's will. And so whatever was taught to me was taught as if it was spoken directly to the authorities in my life. So even though I was always a curious child, I was never a questioning child regarding God's will. So as you are young, you're easily indoctrinated and easily molded to be what they want. My younger siblings definitely, where I was like from birth to 6, raised outside more in the UPC type of churches. My brothers and sisters were in that church almost from birth, right? So my church always taught that from birth to 5, you have an apostolic Pentecostal the rest of your life. As a baby, you break the child's spirit and you build a soldier for Jesus.
Oh my
Now,
God.
how would they do that? How would they break the child's spirit, so to speak? You know what I mean?
Well, if you spare the rod, you spoil the child.
Okay, so they're beating on infants or what? Like,
Well, I can tell you that it does my heart much sorrow to think that I was even a participant now, but I didn't know, right? Blanket training
Oh,
was
right. Blanket
definitely
training. Yeah.
something that was used. When we had a baby in the church, every baby got a pallet, a specially made quilted pallet to go underneath the pew. From the time the baby was 6 months old, if the baby moved off that pallet, it was picked up, taken to the nursery, taken care of, brought back, and put back down on that pallet. Eventually, within 2 or 3 months, that baby doesn't leave the pallet.
Yeah.
oh my gosh, I am like flabbergasted right now.
You've never heard of this?
It is
No,
very
I
much a
have
thing. Now, at
no.
the time, I didn't know that it was called blanket training or
Uh-huh.
high chair training.
Yeah.
But looking back now, I realized that the church was like a village. If I didn't train it to be on that blanket, another woman or my mother would. And the
Right.
older women in the church, to me, were more merciless than I ever was as a young mom. And so I would make sure I would try to get to that baby first, you know. I remember I'm a survivor of domestic violence. I am a survivor of sexual assault.
Mhm.
My earliest memories, I say, as a 4-year-old child, should have been me running in the ocean, making sandcastles.
Yeah.
It is not. It is what is going to happen to me tonight from my father. But the people often wonder, well, how can that happen? It's really easy. You're isolated from teachers, from police officers, from social workers. You're not allowed to talk to anybody that is of this world. You are only allowed to talk to the individuals that are within the church and that are the chosen. So no one knew to go. Who do we go to when you don't know that there's help out there? No, first of all, but second of all, which is more important, you don't know it's wrong. You think that this is a way of life and that this is just what happens.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was 27 years old after I left the cult, sitting in psychology class at OCC, and my professor was talking about it. And I remember starting to like sob quietly
Mhm.
when the feeling dawned on me that what had happened to me and the other girls of my church was illegal and it was wrong. I didn't know it
So
was wrong.
was your dad involved in essaying the other girls as well, or was it a group of men that were doing it?
It was a group of dads that essayed their, and when we look back, me and one of my friends who also has left, we counted 15, and one of them had a baby by their dad. Never a prosecution, never taken to the law. You were not allowed to take what happens inside the four walls of that church outside the four walls of that church.
Mm.
The
What about the
amount,
mothers? What did the mothers know what was
I
going
will
on?
tell you, that is a good point. For the longest time, it was easy for me to be disgusted at the men of the church. And then my mom called me one day, and after I left, my mom called me and she asked me if my dad had ever sexually assaulted me. And I
Your mom
asked
did?
her, pardon?
Your mom did? Who called
Yeah,
you?
my mom.
Oh no. How did she not know? Sorry.
Yeah.
Go, keep talking. Go. Sorry.
So this is what happened. My sister was getting married and she went to the pastor and confessed. And
Mm.
my dad admitted to it in church. Now, this is hearsay. The other part that's hearsay was that people asked, well, what about, Tamara? And they said she's no longer under the blood. She doesn't have to be forgiven.
Oh my gosh. Like you didn't even do anything wrong.
No.
That's what makes me mad. Like they made it about you. It's
Mhm.
you didn't even do anything wrong.
I
That
left.
infuriates me. Okay, so at that point, did you leave or were you already
No.
gone at that point?
At that point that my mother asked me that, and I told my mother, well, yes. I'm like, but the funny thing is that why would you ask me now?
Right.
And
Yeah.
her response was, I'm not giving up my four other children and my future grandbabies for a rebellious daughter who wants her own way, and I will stand by my man.
Oh my gosh. I
And
can't even.
that day, I took this godly, wholesome, beautiful woman off her pedestal. And I clearly say that the women of this church and the men that portray the patriarchy are not the main issues. It is the women who stand behind them and speak truths behind their back and support the men to go and do what they're doing. They know,
Wow.
they stand, and they are not leaving their men for a rebellious woman
Oh,
Rebellious,
who
right?
wants her own
Rebellious.
way.
In air quotes, I'm saying rebellious because that's what they're deeming rebellious,
Mhm.
which I don't really know why she would call you rebellious other than to say that you spoke up about it. Was that
Mhm.
the reason, or had you kind of like started as you were getting older, started like expressing yourself and getting into trouble, so to speak, and all? Was that like playing out like that, or?
No, the funny thing is that I was a very quiet, obedient child. I was
Mm,
extremely stubborn, but I very much walked the walk, talked the talk, lived the life.
yeah,
I,
same.
if they said don't speak to men and look at them in their eyes whenever you have a function and a get together, that men have the talk, the women serve the men while they're doing their business, and the women stay in the kitchen while they're doing, their talk and stuff. I was very humble and very submissive. And I was taught that in order for me not to get beat, that there was a certain way for me to behave when I was amongst public. And I obeyed those things to a T. I never tried to rebel ever. And when I left the church, I left my family's reputation intact because I left being a domestic violence survivor
yeah.
and not an SA survivor, because my father and brothers and sisters are mingled into the pastor's family. some of them. So I didn't want to bring shame to my family by me speaking out what had happened to me. So when I left under the reason of domestic violence. And I never spoke out about my dad. My sister was the one who spoke out a year after I left, maybe when she was getting married, and my dad had to ask the church for forgiveness. But he
And
didn't
then, of
have to
course,
say anything to me.
That was it. He didn't go to
yeah.
jail or anything.
Oh,
So
no.
he's covered by the blood, right? He's covered. It's
He
okay
asked
what he does.
forgiveness.
Yeah,
The blood
of
covered
course.
him. He is
Yeah, he's
absolutely
restored.
fine. Yes, yes. So growing up, if you understand, it was that type of strict control. Like I never thought to try on a pair of pants. I never thought to show my elbows. I never dared to show my collarbones. I was sent home from church one day when I was 16 years old because God blessed me with this curvy body.
Yeah.
And one of the men in the church went to the pastor and said that I was causing him sin. So the pastor got
Oh,
up at church. This happened in church. And the pastor stood me up and told me that I needed to leave, go home, change my clothes, and then return to service dressed in a godly manner. Now, I'm sorry, my dress was to my ankles. My sleeves were to my wrist. It was up here,
Mhm.
covered all the way, but it shaped my curves. And because it shaped my curves and caused a man to sin, I was the one held accountable for him sinning.
Oh my gosh.
unbelievable.
And you know what I did? I went home and
Wow.
changed my clothes and came back to church and asked the church to forgive me for provoking the man, whoever
Oh
it was.
my gosh.
Husband.
God.
So did you have to get up on the platform and like actually ask for forgiveness, or how did you?
Well, women weren't necessarily allowed on the platform, but definitely
Yeah.
from the pews,
Okay.
I stood up and definitely had to. So I knew that this type of shame for anything that I said or did was the repercussions. And, you know, when it's 150 people, that is humiliating.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
all
my
you want to
gosh.
do, you don't think about leaving. The only thing you want to do is be better. You just want to be a good child of God and not cause the men of the church to look at you in a godly, lustful manner with all
Yeah.
sarcasm.
Yeah,
Right.
and the thing is you are never able to attain the level of godliness, quote unquote, that they are trying to get you to attain. It's never enough. You're always, it's like Susie, you said on a recording recently where it's that hamster wheel, that proverbial hamster wheel. You just never get anywhere. It's like constantly trying to do better, trying to, maintain whatever level of quote unquote Christianity that they're expecting you to maintain. And it's impossible. It's impossible.
They
It's
move the
unattainable.
goalpost. When you reach
Yes.
a certain level of godliness for women, they move it another 5 feet.
Yeah.
And when you meet that level, they move it another 5 feet. So you were constantly proving to yourself and to others that you met the level of godliness that was required out of your church family.
Right. Yeah. It's crazy.
It is insane. I didn't know. People are like, oh my goodness, you are so much better today. And I look at them and I'm like, okay. It's hard for me to comprehend that and to wrap my brain around that because I was raised in a culture. It was a certain way of life. It wasn't like, oh, it's just so easy. It's so good that you walked away. And I often say, I believed at the time that I did what was best, but I did not do what was right
Mm.
because that's where I was at. I did what was best because I knew that my children could not be the next generation of whatever this was that was happening. But there was many years because the journey was so hard because of the indoctrination that I always question if I did what was right.
Mm.
Because they would have protected me. If I would have just stayed, I would have regained my place in the church, I would have been taken care of. I wouldn't have seen the financial struggles or the struggles that single moms go through. I had a very sick child that was born without an immune system and had to have IVs every 3 weeks. Immunoglobulins. He was IgG subclass 2 and 4. Didn't build antibodies. So when I moved from South Florida, I also had to transfer all of his medical records from Gainesville to Children's Hospital. So those kind of things, trying to learn how to just maneuver life on top of indoctrination was almost more than I could do. So I learned that survival mode and that adrenaline you have when you're in survival mode was what kept me going, because there was nothing for me to compare to. I didn't have any type of normalcy, because when I left, instantly, within 3 seconds of me walking over a threshold of a church, it was destroyed.
Yeah. So was there like a certain thing, like the straw that broke the camel's back, so to speak, that caused you to say, enough is enough. I'm out of here. I'm done.
I can tell you, my husband, when we get married, it wasn't an arranged marriage, but it was God's will that I marry him, if you understand what I'm saying.
I
So out of
absolutely understand that.
all the people in the church, that was God's will. Okay. It didn't mean I didn't love him. I had not fallen in love with him, but because it was God's will, he would provide and make a way. So I married him. This man was a monster. I thought my father was a monster, but this man was a monster. So he beat me, abused me in every type of way you can imagine. And I always thought that I needed to be a better wife, a better mother. There were times that I put my body over my children's bodies, and remind you, they were 3, 2, and brand new babies. And I would take the beatings, and my back would be welted and bruised. But I wouldn't let him beat my 2-year-old or my 1-year-old that was severely medically involved. I finally went to the pastor and admitted to what he was doing to me.
And what was his response?
That I needed to ask God to help me be a better wife.
Oh, how did I know you were going to say something like
God,
that?
I knew it. Yeah.
And at the time, at first I did. And then he tried to unalive me. And I had no choice but to go to the police.
Yeah, good for you.
And that started the journey, because I also went to Egypt for help.
Oh yeah, going outside the church for help. That is like the cardinal sin. Don't do it.
And I was the first female to take the secrecy and go to a minister. So then our church started preparing through services. I remember sitting in church throughout that time after I went to him, and the pastor saying that if there's any new people in the church, I will have a statement and a sermon for when they're here. And if it's just us, I will have a sermon for when they're not.
Meaning
So
what?
because they weren't sure if Egypt would start showing up, because I reported.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh. That's crazy.
It is.
Oh, that's crazy. So did the police do anything? Because in my experience, I also am a survivor of a domestic violence previous marriage, and it was very similar to how you explained. I do consider it was more of an arranged marriage, where it's like, yeah, same type of thing. Like, this is God's will for your life. This is who we think God wants you to marry and be with, blah, blah, blah. And so within the marriage, there was domestic violence. Now, funny thing is, not funny, but ironic. He would always say, like, I never hit you. I never hit you. Okay, well, you did other things. Like, it doesn't have to be hitting, but that, for whatever reason, for like the people in the church, it wasn't enough. It was like, oh, she's just being dramatic, or oh, it wasn't really domestic violence because he never hit her. And so let me just say to anyone listening, domestic violence is not defined by just hitting. There's many, many forms of domestic violence, and it doesn't just have to be exclusive to hitting. So I just want to put that out there. But when I went to 3 different police departments and had 3 different police reports about things that he was doing, I had only one that actually did something. And was that your experience at all with like involving the police? Did they actually do anything for you?
Well, what I found out when I started going is that I didn't have a paper trail. I didn't know what a paper trail was. I didn't
Yeah.
know how to make a paper trail. I was not going to get any help from the women of my church. And actually, he beat me in front of the men in the church. He reached into the car one Sunday morning and beat me. The men pulled him off of me, went back into the church. And when I came in, I was told that I needed to repent as well. And I said, why am I to repent? I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And they're like, all men have temper. This came from the pastor. All men have
Wow.
tempers. And if you trigger your husband's temper, then it is your responsibility to ask God for you to become a more godly wife. This way, this does not happen.
So did you say that to the police? Like, oh, like this is what the men in the church are telling me. Like, I have provoked my husband to anger, and so it's my fault. Like, did the police ever do anything? Did they ever arrest him, or did you? When you say paper trail, I always think of, and I've told friends of mine this, like, even if the police do nothing, at least file a report so you start documenting what is happening.
That
Is
is
that
what
what you
I had
did?
to, that is
Yeah.
what I had to do. I had to just start calling and making reports.
Yeah.
I can tell you that when I first started, I was connected with the survival group. And as they would talk to me about domestic violence, and then I started to learn more about domestic violence, they would go to me to court to get a PPO. And the
Good.
people who were there beside me was my attorney and the survival counselor or the domestic violence counselor.
Yeah.
But when I would go to church, then I was told that I was going to be sat on the back pew and that all the women would no longer have any association with me. They couldn't talk to me. They couldn't call me on the phone. They couldn't help me out in any way if I tried to call. And my ex was moved to the front of the church and was told because he asked God to forgive him, he was given forgiveness. And I was in the sin, and my children would pay the price of their mother,
Oh.
who was at that time, 1999, 90 woman, liberal woman, and wanted her own way.
Oh my
So
gosh.
that was my first. So I did that for a year, going to church, being shunned, being called up with a scarlet letter on my chest, chastised every service. And I remember my friends saying, just go to the altar and repent. That is all you have to do. And I'm like, I am not repenting because I folded his socks wrong, or I didn't make the dinner the right way, so the table was flipped on me because the dinner wasn't exactly the way he wanted it.
Right.
I'm not asking forgiveness for those things. I've not sinned.
Yes, good for you.
Wow.
I love it.
But
I love it.
those statements cost me.
Yeah.
And I didn't
Sure.
realize at the time that the price would be so high, because I thought the 150 so people in that church knew me since I was a baby and knew that I wouldn't be lying or exaggerating or trying to tell this awful, horrific story. I knew they would believe me.
Yeah.
And I just
Mm.
kept trusting God that one person would believe me.
Yeah.
And not a single woman reached out.
Oh,
Nobody believed me, including my mom and dad and my brothers and sisters. And I
Wow.
realize now that the reason why my mom and dad did not back me is because they also knew if they did, I may turn the chance and expose what has happened to them to me. from them,
Wow.
for me.
Yeah,
Oh
it
my
was
God.
really, it was about them. It had nothing to do with
Nothing.
you and what happened. It was their response and reaction was totally about a CYA for the
Yes.
house.
Yes. I was often told by my mother that she was not going to, she loved me, but she was not going to risk the relationship with her other children that decided to stay in the church and believe God and obey God's commandments for a daughter who wanted her own way and to be rebellious.
Oh my gosh. I do not believe God is actually like that.
No,
The God I want
exactly.
to follow is not like that.
Well,
And
this is exactly a segue to what you just said.
yeah.
So the day that I left was June 30th, 1998. And the pastor got up in church that day and he said that from now on, this is after a year of me going to the police and getting records. Any child abuse, domestic abuse, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, incest abuse, anything that you can add abuse to the end of it will forever be taken care of by the men of this church within the walls of these church. And any woman who wants to go to Egypt for help can walk out that door now. And he marched down the aisle and he looked right at me and I stood up. I walked up to my dad and mom. I put my finger in their chest and I said, the God of my childhood is not the God that you're serving today. And I walked out of the church.
Oh,
That was my last time ever talking or having any association with family, my church family, or my mom and dad. I left from the church house. And I
Oh,
didn't realize that 3 seconds were going to propel me into a completely different life. Because for some reason, in the back of my head, I thought when I left, they would know I was serious about what happened and they would reach out. It is now 26 years later, and my brothers and sisters, I'm the oldest of five, and I have about 25 or 30 nieces and nephews I've never seen, and they've never spoken to me since.
wow. Oh man. Wow. Oh,
I'm sorry that
well,
happened to you. I have to tell you that I think you are so brave. And
yes.
it is painful when that
It
you're
was, to
rejected.
this day, the shunning part, because I know I did nothing wrong.
Mm,
Mm.
Sometimes when I sit alone in my darkest hours, it's
mm,
very sad because not only did I lose everything, so did my children.
Mm.
mm.
But you know what? Your kids have you, and
Right.
you are such a strong woman, and you're such a good example that you do not tolerate and put up with abuse and indoctrination and control. And the best relationships are the ones who allow you to be you and to
Right.
love you unconditionally for who you are. And so,
Exactly.
and you're teaching them that. Like you're a living example of that.
When I
Mm.
see my son out in the wildfire, he's a wildland wildfire fighter. And when I
Wow.
see him send me in pictures, on the top of a mountain, I looked at that. I actually posted it the other yesterday, and I was like, he had made a comment on my TikTok, right, about a picture of my son and stuff. And I was like, when I look at this picture and I put it up, it is like a complete empowering moment for me, is that I raised children that had their mama's trauma, but I didn't raise them with their own trauma.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
all of my children have started in the last year and a half the EMDR process
Oh,
Okay.
good.
and are in therapy and make sure that those areas of their life that did affect them from my trauma are being looked at and addressed. And I can only be thankful that I can stand here not condemning, not shaming them for it, but stand tall and proud that we
Yes.
did it.
Oh my gosh.
I love
What
it.
I love it so much. What you did was you lost everything bad. And you lost what I call carefully controlled blindness.
Mm.
Construct that they control the narrative, they control everything in a way that makes people turn a blind eye to what's really happening.
Right.
And so you lost everything bad. You lost that construct that was designed to minimize and mistreat. And instead, you pursued safe, healing
Yeah.
love. And that's what your family has grown up in now.
Yes.
And it's beautiful. You chose safety and love, which they go together. But in the environment you grew up in, that's not what you were taught about love. And
No, when I left, I learned that love was conditional.
yeah.
And I vowed the day I walked out of that church house that morning, my statement was, I will never let them break me. I said these words out loud. I will never let me become bitter. I will never raise my children with hate towards them. I will never be what they are. I will never shun somebody who needs light. I will sit with you in the darkness. I will teach you and show you that there is life after trauma, and that you don't have to live in survival mode once you're free of whatever it was that you left. And I said those words, and I was at the Women's March in Lansing, June 26th, and Citizen Soldier kind of happens to be my dearest band.
Uh-huh.
They have a song that says, "Thank you for hating me."
Oh,
And
wow.
if you listen to the words of Citizen Soldier, he is a trauma therapist that writes songs for survivors. And he said, in that song, I sat there, and as I was at the Women's March, right, feeling all proud of myself, because, you know, you look back from where you come and it's like, I wish you could see me now. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I sat there and I started crying when the song came on. And it was like, for the first time, I had this feeling like it was okay. Because if they didn't hate me, if they didn't shun me, if they didn't turn their backs on me, if they wrapped their arms around me and loved me like I thought I should have been loved and what I deserved and what I thought I had earned, you know, to show them I was a good person, I would be just like them today. I
Mm.
wouldn't love marginalized communities. I wouldn't be an ally. I wouldn't understand the importance of humanity and rights and equal rights for everyone if they didn't turn their back on me
Mm.
and said no. I would have never been able to embrace a life of saying yes.
yeah.
Oh
Oh,
my gosh, I love that. I
And
love that you're able to look at it from that perspective. That is so just inspiring, honestly,
it took
Tamara.
25 years because I always carry this like shadow of shame. I always kind of feel like sometimes trauma kind of just like sits up on my shoulders and it's
yeah.
there, even though nobody knows, because unless I talk about it, people think, don't look at me like that. You know what I'm saying? And it's not something you talk about.
Right.
So, I just go through life, and I remember sitting at that women's march going, all of us were singing the song Labor. And I'm like, I would have never had the opportunity to do
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
if somebody in my past wouldn't have propelled me into survival mode and propelled me to walk away from hate. And it just confirms that there is life after feeling that you've been affected by trauma.
Mhm.
There is a way to live a fulfilled being, still talking about it, still having the passion to say patriarchy is wrong, misogyny is disgusting. I will speak and talk about what you do to us every day. I will call names, places, people, times. I don't care. It's my story. But you, the people in West Palm Beach, Florida, do not own the power to tell my story anymore. It's mine. You can use it to fearmonger. You can use my story to suppress the women of your church. You can use it for me as being a Jezebel. But there's another side of that story, and I will counteract every time I know you're using that story for those little girls in that church, because
Mm.
somebody's sneaking out and looking at social media. Somebody in that church is disobeying the rules of the laws of that church. and I hope they hear my voice.
So let's talk about that. You have quite a platform on social media, and I would love for you to tell people about that, and then also how can they find you?
Well, it's kind of funny. And when TikTok was getting banned, I went to my Facebook page and changed it to Jezebel. This way everybody could find me. And like I had 200 followers on my Facebook page, and I have like 2,500 now. It was
Amazing.
like overnight. I'm like, what just happened here? Not because of all the people, but I realized that I just left my Facebook page for my past and for people that I knew of from my past and family. And I stayed controlled of it. And I was like, why am I doing that? And I
Mm.
opened it all up. So Jezebel is my, or Goddess Jezebel is my tag for all platforms. Clapper, Blue Sky, Lemon Tree,
Mhm.
TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. I didn't start speaking out until I started talking on TikTok 5 years ago. Nobody knew my story or anything. And I thought, now's the time. Today's the day. At dawn, we rise.
That's
Yes.
awesome. I love it. So
And I was like,
you also have another purpose for telling your
yes.
story. Talk about that.
My purpose originally started with TikTok. When it first started, I often have vowed myself to leave a living legacy for my children.
Oh,
I love
There's
yes.
that.
stories that it's very difficult to talk to a 30-year-old about. There's stories that's very difficult to honestly kind of like pick up the phone and say, hey, do you want to know something about your mom? So I've left my son in charge of my legacy account. So he has it always. And I speak openly about the harm of patriarchy, the harm of misogyny, the harm of not loving people unconditionally, and telling my story in clips. Some are very triggering. I apologize for that in advance. Some of them are funny, some of them are obnoxious, but it's different personalities of who I am and part of my dark humor or my humor. So it just gives an opportunity for my children to be able to go back and actually see a living journal of their mom. And also I make sure I keep a timeline of my weight loss. When I first started speaking out on TikTok in 2019, it was probably soon after there, but 2009, January 2019, I had bariatric surgery. And sometimes I will post my journey through losing weight. I've lost 185 pounds. I've gone from a
Wow,
size 26 to a medium.
that's
Wow.
amazing. Congratulations.
I
Wow.
spent
I love
6 months in St. John Hospital on Marosse because
it.
of that surgery.
Oh
Oh
my
my
goodness.
gosh.
Yes. And I was TBN fed for 6 months.
Oh my
Oh,
So
gosh.
everything that could happen for a bariatric surgery person happened to me. I've just got to be the 1 out of 10,000.
Oh
Um,
gosh. So when you fill out the form, right? The waiver, like I understand this,
right.
that, and the other thing could happen. You had all those things happen to you.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're a survivor in all aspects then.
I went septic. I was in the ICU for 3 weeks. I wasn't expected to live. My heart rate went to 180 beats per minute. They had to put the medicine in me and shock me back to life. And I was like, oh, I did all this to be skinny.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
But I always say that because my journey of weight loss is a visual of my journey from healing from trauma.
Yeah.
Mm.
Because I got fat, because I didn't know what to do once I left the church, of men, how they approached me, what they said to me. Now I'm free from all those extended boundaries. What do I do and how do I interact? I didn't understand or didn't know. But if
Yeah.
I was just the fat, funny girl, I didn't have to worry about learning to adjust
Mm.
Oh,
in a
wow.
world full of male attention, if that makes sense,
Yeah. So
especially when I was
did you,
so
did you,
insecure about men.
yeah, I'm sorry. Did you feel like when you were overweight that that was sort of like a protection?
Absolutely.
Okay.
100%. It was like I could just be the fat, funny girl. Nobody thought I was flirting. Nobody thought I was trying to be provocative. They all just thought I was funny. So with every weight loss, every pound lost, I had to address different indoctrinational thoughts, wearing
Wow.
pants, wearing skirts that are shorter, showing my body, being proud of my shapes and curves, which I never was in the past because I always made men sin. So I had to unlearn or just say, go ahead and sin.
Right. Wow.
It's like, I can't control if you sin. I can only control what I'm doing. And that's the way I started approaching it. But then I started realizing how much indoctrinational thoughts I had to unravel as I became smaller and I fit into the world around me. Because let's face it, skinny girls fit a lot easier than 350-pound girls. Sadly, I am treated 100% different. Men will hold the door open for me to walk up to them, where before they would just open, walk in, and if I caught it, it would be good. So I had to undo and really deconstruct indoctrination. Heaven and hell are easy. Devils versus angels, that doesn't faze me in the least. I belong to the Secular Alliance of Michigan, SAM, and being a humanist is who I am and what I am to my core. But I realized that over my journey of time doing this, that the reason I'm able to embrace not what I am, but who I am, is because I've started healing and letting those things go.
I love that. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
This is so beautiful, just hearing your story and like empowering, I have to tell you, not just like you give hope for people that have been through really bad situations, just to see how you didn't just save yourself, you saved others out of it. And by your living legacy that you're leaving for your kids is also a framework that is so much better than that carefully constructed blindness for anybody else who's trying to get out of those situations, or even your same church, not just generalized. I mean, specifically for all those nieces and nephews that you've never met, you're creating a healing framework that when their life falls apart, because it will in that environment, it wasn't just yours, it will, something will happen. And then you'll be the guide for being able to get out of it. I mean, I know that's the hope I have for my own life, for all those people that I left behind that wanted to stay in the mistreatment. This is
And you have to respect, I haven't gotten to the point ever that I'm an angry atheist or an angry secular humanist, because I was once them. Understand when they make comments about me being a Jezebel or me going to hell or me not choosing Jesus, I am extremely compassionate because that is what I spoke. That is who I was. That is what I was. But who I am today is not a little girl who was trying to survive. I'm not.
And I just want you to know, when you were talking about Egypt, so originally, like immediately my mind was like, you left America and went to Egypt. I had to totally like stumble on moment. But I gotta tell you, the idea that they are using Egypt like that in a bad connotation, right there in the story of Jesus, that was a safe healing place for him and his family against the people that were part of the religious community when he was a child. So Egypt was a good place. And I love that you went to Egypt because it saved you. Like it's awesome.
It did. I was 27 years old, and I may have mentioned this, so you can take it out. When I was sitting in the psychology class and realized everything that happened to me was wrong, it took me another 20 years to become comfortable with saying, I am also an SA survivor. I am also a survivor of severe child abuse. My mother could beat me like nobody else to where I was black and blue and bloody. She pretty much dictated the punishments to my father. So I totally understand that when I actually started speaking out 5 years ago and doing TikToks, that I realized that if I was going to be authentic, if I was going to speak my truths to power, I was going to have to be comfortable with all parts of the abuse that I endured and saw.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That is really good. I think that's important because healing, it does need to consider all those parts to truly be healed. And that's going to look different for every person, but I love that
Absolutely.
it involves being brave enough to say these other part or even acknowledge that they happened, and recognizing they were bad.
Because as long as I stayed quiet,
Mm-hmm.
they stayed in control of my power, because
Yeah.
they want to buy your power. They want to feel that you're shamed enough that you will never mention their names.
Uh-huh. Huh. Good
And
way to put it.
they don't hold power over me today. I was
Mhm.
once the girl that was the victim. I learned how to turn being a victim into learning how to survive. And now this chapter of my life is not needing to learn how to be in survival mode to live, but to live with dignity and grace.
Mm.
Oh, I love that. Oh my
Thank
gosh. Tamara, we have just thoroughly enjoyed this
Thank you.
conversation.
So have I.
And good. And we are so happy that you joined us today and giving us this overview of your life and how you experienced trauma in your younger years and control within the cult church, and now what you're doing with that and turning that around and really breaking that generational cycle, right? That generational trauma cycle in your family, and what you're doing to help others is just amazing. And oh gosh, it's been such a great conversation with you.
I would like to end it with something else that I did write,
Yeah.
if I can. It says,
Awesome.
it's a lifetime of healing. Minutes become hours, hours fade to days, days turned into months, stowed, aching haze. Months stretched into years, then a lifetime is spun, a journey of healing that's only begun. Shadows of childhood still whisper my name, ghosts of the past playing cruel, bitter games. Bruises once hidden, both silent and deep, scars that no longer will rock me to sleep.
Mm.
Hands that once hurt me, words that once bled, echoes of violence that danced in my head. I broke from the chains, I shattered the lie, but learning to live meant learning to cry. The world outside was both wondrous and cruel, a place without masters, a life without rules. I stumbled, I faltered, I fell to my knees, but power was waiting inside me, the key. I gathered my pieces, I silenced my doubt. I found my own voice and I learned how to shout, not in anger, not in pain, not in fear anymore, but in strength and survival. I am so much more. Minutes to hours, days into years. Healing is slow, but I'm still standing here. A lifetime of battles, but I hold to the light. No longer a victim. I'm winning this fight.
Oh,
I know. Oh my goodness.
that is so good. I'm literally crying. That is amazing. You got to publish this stuff.
Well,
Oh,
I'm hoping to.
Mhm. Well, even
yeah,
Type that's where I'm at today, and that this part can be like taken out. But the essence of who I am today
yeah, this is
is
it.
that.
I love how you explain that. And I have to tell you, if you want to publish it in a book, that'd be great. But I want to listen to it as like bedtime stories.
right?
Or
I will definitely do an audio because I know that's what people love and what I love. And just knowing words of empowerment and learning that life is not only after trauma, but there's life after
Yeah.
survival as well.
Yeah.
After you decide survival no longer works for you, then you walk into the era of living.
Yeah. Thrival. It's not survival, it's thriving. That's beautiful.
Thank you guys so much for your time. I just adore you.
Healing is a process, a journey to be experienced, not just a destination.
You are not alone in this. It's okay to take your time, explore different perspectives, and find what resonates with you. Healing takes courage, and we believe in you.
Together, we can enjoy the ride.